All right. Hey, everybody. So, excuse me. I'm just gonna do a quick little video about, excuse me, about a accomplice to Frank Terpil, who is a member of what I call the Blonde Network, and it's actually he's a minor character, a minor player, but I became familiar with his name based off of this New York Times article by Peter Mass, published in 1986 in the New York Times, titled "Selling Out: How an Ex-CIA Agent Made Millions Working for Gaddafi." So the main character in the this expose article is Edwin P. Wilson, who is famously known as the rogue CIA operative who got caught selling C4 explosives to Gaddafi in Libya, which were likely used in terrorist events throughout the world. However, one of Edwin Wilson's accomplices was a person named Frank E. Terpil, who is the namesake of the documentary, which I highly recommend you watch, called Frank Terpil, Confessions of a Dangerous Man. I believe it was released in 1982. It was produced by Anthony Thomas and David Fanning. You can watch it for free on YouTube. So to kind of get to the point, there's a person whose name is Joseph McElroy, who actually helped Frank Terpil in some of his arms shipments, who was later indicted. I haven't found a lot about him online. However, I just want to talk about him just real quick. So, where to begin? I'm gonna do this right here. So this is from the UPI archives from 1981, and it's titled "Pennsylvania Man Keep Witness in CIA Libyan Case," report says. So let me blow this up for you. All right, make sure my volume's good. We're good. Okay, so Philadelphia, a gun given by a Pennsylvania businessman to one of two former CIA agents wanted for allegedly shipping explosives to Libya has been linked to the London slang of a Libyan dissident, a published report says. So interesting. So they're saying that a gun that this guy helped to sell to Frank Terpil or the CIA guys was used in the London slang of a Libyan dissident, right? And the Bulletin reported Sunday that Joseph G. McElroy, 43, of West Reading, Pennsylvania, is a key witness in the government's case against former CIA agents Edwin Wilson and Frank Terpil. McElroy told federal agents that he gave a gun to Terpil at a meeting in Washington before the May 1980 assassination in London of Mustafa Ramadan, an outspoken critic of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The newspaper said London authorities have linked the gun to Ramadan's killing, the bulletin said. In July, McElroy was sentenced by the U.S. District Attorney, or sorry, the U.S. District Court Judge Edward Kahn in Philadelphia to a 6-month term in the federal prison at Allenwood, Pennsylvania. He pleaded no defense to income tax evasion, illegal weapon sales overseas, and importing 24 million in promissory notes issued by the Sudanese government without notifying the U.S. Treasury Department. The newspaper cited Justice Department sources as saying that McElroy, who is in federal custody, received the minimum sentence because he agreed to testify against Wilson and Terpil, both fugitives, if they are ever apprehended. Wilson reportedly is living in Libya and Terpil somewhere in the Middle East. The involvement of Wilson and Terpil with Gaddafi is the subject of a grand jury investigation in Washington, the newspaper said. Assistant U.S. Attorney Carol Bruce told Judge Kahn that McElroy's testimony would provide a link between Terpil and the slaying of Ramadan. She told Kahn that Ramadan was shot outside a London mosque by one of two armed men, the bulletin said. A Colt 38 caliber revolver was dropped by the gunman who did not fire his weapon, was recovered and turned over to Scotland Yard. Let me read that again. So a Colt 38 revolver that was dropped by the gunman who did not fire his weapon was recovered and turned over to Scotland Yard. U.S. Treasury agents traced the handgun to McElroy's collection of 50 weapons, the newspaper said. McElroy, who owned Pennsylvania Mining Co. in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, originally told investigators that he bought the guns as gifts to improve his business dealings in Africa and the Middle East nations, it said. So that's really it on that. So that's kind of interesting. So this thing keeps wanting to pop up. All right. So let me see here. So yeah, so this kind of feeds back into my other video I did about how Frank Terpil's gun sales relate to the murder of London policewoman Yvonne Fletcher. So it seems like a lot of guns that Terpil was involved in smuggling and trafficking ended up in various Libyan embassies. And there was, now that I'm learning, there was two high-profile shootings linked to Terpil's guns. One of this Ramadan gentleman and the other of Yvonne Fletcher, the London policewoman. And this is very interesting. So this is very interesting. So if we go to this article here, this is the New York Times article selling out how an ex-CIA agent made millions working for Gaddafi. So let's read this part here. So Edwin Wilson first met Frank E. Terpil at a 1975 Christmas party for current and former intelligence operatives in Bathsheba, Maryland. And let me see here. Bathsheba, Maryland. Terpil was a CIA communications man who had been phased out under a cloud, suspected, among other things, of using diplomatic pouches to smuggle contraband. So Terpil obviously knew plenty about Wilson and told him that he had a really good hook into Libya through Gaddafi's first cousin, Syed Qaddafadam, who was handling military procurement out of the Libyan Embassy in London. His connection, Terpil said, was this Pennsylvania guy, McElroy, Joseph McElroy, one of the earliest entrepreneurs to cash in on the money-flush oil nations in Africa and the Middle East. McElroy began supplying everything from Pampers to pistols. Gradually, his best customer became Libya, and Pampers yielded more and more to pistols. Terpil had just helped McElroy bring 50 handguns to the London Embassy, but now McElroy wanted out. In 1984, the world was treated on television and in the press to the picture of a young British policewoman sprawled mortally wounded on the street, cut down by a fusillade of shots from Libya's London embassy during an anti-Qaddafi demonstration. Britain broke diplomatic relations with Libya, and after an 11-day standoff, the Libyans in the embassy were forced to leave the country. A search of the embassy then turned up several American guns with discharged chambers, and although it was never announced publicly, they were traced by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to the shipment Terpil had helped deliver. So in the fall of 1976, Wilson and Terpil set up a bomb factory for Libyans around 25 miles south of Tripoli. He supplied a variety of explosives and programmable detonators, along with a cadre of instructors that included ex-CIA explosive men, then two technicians on leave from a secret Navy weapons testing facility, which I want to say, this is me talking, is China Lake, which is now a closed U.S. Navy weapons testing facility that Frank Terpil talked about in the documentary that he was in which he mentioned China Lake, and two Army bomb disposal experts whose services had often been used by the United States Secret Services on presidential security details. Years later, when one of the Army men, a sergeant, was questioned by federal authorities, He said, tears sliding down his face, "I don't know why I did it. I guess it was the money." So I'm going to take a quick break. All right, so I'm back. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. It's just very fascinating. So it looks like these guns that, let me see here, McElroy. So 50 handguns. They sent 50 handguns, him and Terpil, to a London embassy. And in this article, they're talking about how policewoman Yvonne, I'll pull it up here, the murder of Yvonne Fletcher happened. So let's read this and blow it up for you. So that's a photo of the police over her body. So this happened in 1984. So the murder of Yvonne Fletcher, a metropolitan officer, occurred on 17 April 1984 when she was fatally wounded by a shot fired from the Libyan Embassy on St. James Square, London, by an unknown gunman. Fletcher had been deployed to monitor a demonstration against the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and died shortly afterwards. Her death resulted in an 11-day siege of the embassy, and at the end of which those inside were expelled from the country and the United Kingdom severed relations with Libya. So between 1980 and 1984, Gaddafi had ordered the deaths of several exiled opponents of his regime. Bombings and shootings targeted at Libyan dissidents occurred in Manchester and London. 5 Libyans thought to be behind the attacks were reported from the UK. During the anti-Qaddafi protests on 17 April 1984, 2 gunmen opened fire from the first floor of the embassy with Sterling machine guns. Jeez. That's what they kind of look like there. In addition to the murder of Fletcher, 11 Libyan demonstrators were wounded. The inquest into Fletcher's death reached the verdict that she was killed by a bullet coming from one of 2 windows on the west side of the front on the first floor of the Libyan's People's Bureau. Following the breaking of diplomatic relations, Libya arrested 6 British nationals, the last 4 of whom were released after 9 months in captivity. So 2 years after Fletcher's murders, the event became a factor in the decision by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to allow the U.S. bombing of Libya from bases in the UK. In 1999, a warming of diplomatic relations between Britain and Libya led to a statement from the Libyan government admitting culpability in Fletcher's shooting and the payment of compensation. British police continued their investigation until 2017. Although sufficient evidence existed to prosecute one of the co-conspirators, no charges were brought as some of the evidence could not be raised in court due to national security concerns. As of 2024, no one has been convicted of Fletcher's murders, although in 2021, the High Court of Justice determined that Gaddafi's ally, Salah Ibrahim Mabrouk, was jointly liable for Fletcher's murder. So that's kind of a picture of her. And I'll leave the link so you can kind of read into her background. So pretty unfortunate, but that's just very interesting that in this article they're talking about Yvonne Fletcher, but in this other article they're talking about even another death of another person, Mustafa Ramadan, in 1980. So that was in 1980. Mustafa Ramadan was killed, and in 1984, Yvonne Fletcher ended up being killed, and other people got wounded. But if you go back to this article, it's very interesting that I need to find it, because these Libyan assassinations of dissidents against Gaddafi also relates to my other video about Eugene Tafoya and Luke Thompson and the Green Berets who were recruited by Patry Loomis, in which Eugene Tafoya was caught trying to kill a Libyan dissident student at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and he was also incriminated, this Eugene Tafoya, in a car bombing in Canada. And I want to say there was, here we go. There was also other killings being done of Libyan dissidents. So it seems that basically you had this rogue CIA network that I call the Blonde Ghost Network, helping Gaddafi basically pick off his adversaries. And why they did this, I don't know. Maybe they were just trying to get in on the good side of Gaddafi so they can mold deeper and deeper into what Libya was doing, or we're dealing with people who just absolutely have no consciousness and no affiliation, who use their CIA power and relationships, because relationships are everything in the CIA, to basically just be, you know, war profiteers, being the chaos agents that kind of keep, you know, the black markets kind of flowing and everything like that. So it's kind of hard to really know the end game here. Was this just kind of like, you know, deep cover on steroids without any sort of moral ethics? Because, typically when you hear about like informants going undercover, they're not allowed to like kill people, they're not allowed to do drugs and stuff like that, right? And however, when it comes to the CIA, though, it seems like the rules get bent because it's all about achieving the end, right? So you use whatever means you can to achieve the end. So they're able to kind of operate outside the bounds of the law a little bit more than traditional law enforcement. Um, However, so let me read this part here in this article about how the Green Berets were recruited, and how this also deals with the Libyan assassinations. Because basically, what they're proving in this article and in the other articles that I've been reading, particularly about Eugene Tafoya and the Coloradan, is that these Green Berets were basically just an assassination squad being leased out to Gaddafi by the Blind Ghost network of Edwin Wilson, Frank Terpil, Ted Shackley, Richard Secord, etc. So some pretty gnarly stuff here, right? So I'm gonna read this here. So if Wilson could supply C4, Hajaji told him. Actually, no, I'm gonna read it even up further. All right. Okay, so Wilson also got an inkling of the riches in store for him. His principal contact was Major Abdullah Hijazi of Libyan military intelligence. For his first payment of $350,000 US cash, and granted this is the late 70s, early 80s, in cash, Wilson dispatched an employee, Douglas M. Schlachter, who I recently learned about by reading this article, who I also want to do another little video about, to Hajaji's headquarters. Schlachter was ushered into a vault lined room, and a drawer was pulled out with $100 bills. So when it was learned that the money was for deposit in Switzerland, Schlachter was asked if Swiss francs would it be more convenient. And when he said he guessed so, another drawer was opened filled with them. And then he was shown other drawers loaded with French francs, German marks, and British pounds. You see, he was told, we have whatever you want. This same Hajazi today is Libya's liaison with the infamous Abu Nidal Palestinian terrorist group, which is said to be responsible for the wholesale slaughter of passengers at airports in Rome and Vienna, and most recently was implicated in the bombing of a TWA flight to Athens this month. The initial cash payments caused an almost immediate split between Wilson and Terpil when Wilson discovered that his partner was skimming. As much as 10% of each payment was found to be missing by the time the money reached Switzerland. Wilson told Hajazi that Terpil claimed the missing money went for bribes he needed to pay Libyan officials. Among them, Hajjaji and Terpil was ordered out of the country. So let me see here. So Wilson told Hajjaji that Terpil claimed the missing money went for bribes he had to pay Libyan officials, among them Hajjaji, and Terpil was ordered out the country. So basically, Terpil Terpil and Wilson are working together, but they have a fallout because Terpil's skimming off the top, and Terpil's excuse is he needs to pay bribes to the Libyans. But when Wilson follows up with Hajjaji denies it, and they realize Terpil's lying, and they kick Terpil out the country. So Terpil, even Frank Terpil, there's no truth among thieves, right? Like even he wasn't necessarily like as loyal of a soldier to Wilson as what one would claim or how what one would think. Um, every man out for himself type thing, right? So, however, what the Libyans most yearned for was American-made composition C4, a whitish putty-like explosive of enormous power which under the strictest export controls. Its main ingredient, called RDX, is unmatched in destructive potential save for nuclear weapons. Commercially, explosives made of RDX were in demand for demolition projects because of their malleability and the way their force could be directed. The same features made RDX a favorite for terrorists to blow up a building, preferably in Israel, or a car, or for turning ordinary household items, an ashtray, a lamp, a radio, into instruments of death. The versatility of RDX didn't stop there. It could be manufactured in sheets, usually a foot wide and a quarter-inch thick. The sheets were pliable and could be cut into any desired size or shape. A classic terrorist tactic was to mail such an explosive in an envelope wired to a miniature detonator. When the recipient opened the flap, he or she was torn apart. If Wilson could supply C4, Hajjaji told him, the sky was the limit on the other contracts. And on April 2nd, 1977, 500 pounds of C4 hidden in cans of DAP glazing compound left Los Angeles aboard a Lufthansa flight for Frankfurt, where it was transferred to another flight destined for Tripoli. Exactly 6 months later, on October 2nd, a charter DC-8 took off from Houston, laden with a staggering 21 tons of C4 hidden in cans labeled as drilling oil mud. It was the biggest private shipment of an explosive in world history, and it was going to the Center for World Terrorism, Gaddafi's Libya, on the orders of Edwin P. Wilson. So it's kind of funny. You kind of hear the cat in the background. Oh no, just but but it's So let me keep going here. So just think about this, right? I'm just trying to put this into perspective, right? So we're talking about a minor character, James McElroy, who owned this kind of like mining trading company. And he was one of the first guys to kind of get ahead of like trading with, the oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries, right? He knows Terpil, therefore he knows by proxy Edwin Wilson, and Wilson, is for whatever reason digging deeper into Libya. And actually, I'm trying to figure this out. Actually, it seems I'm not sure who initially started the Libyan connections. Was it Terpil or was it Wilson? But it looks like it was probably Wilson. Let me see here. Because it said Terpil obviously knew plenty about Wilson and told him that he had a really good hook into Libya through Gaddafi's first cousin. Gotcha. So it looks like Terpil, as this rogue dealer, was kind of the plug for Wilson, but Wilson, being a higher up in the CIA, being really good at setting up shell companies, sees this as like a gold mine operation and goes into business basically with Terpil and everything like that. So they kind of become like they have their own things going with Libya, but they're kind of working together in Libya. Um, so there's that. Okay, so let me keep reading here. So once Hajaji was able to finger a chunk of C4 at a bomb factory Wilson was operating, to smile at the prospect of the bodies it would dismember, he was as good as his word um, about additional contracts. For $8 million a year, Wilson was asked to supply restricted parts for Gaddafi's fleet of American C-130 military transport planes, and for another 1.2 million American British pilots to fly them. So let me see here. He received an order for long-range surveillance vans designated for desert patrols and equipped with day and night vision TV cameras that had an image intensification tube whose unregulated export was forbidden by federal law. In between social events, Wilson demonstrated one of the cameras for Libyan intelligence officers right at Mount Airy Farms. He entered into an agreement to provide veterans of the United States Special Forces Green Berets to train commando teams. The Libyans paid $100,000 per Green Beret. Wilson in turn recruited each of them for half as much. So the Berets were a natural choice for Wilson. For years, the CIA had been using Special Forces men on covert missions that required military expertise, and that in the way he would frame it, this would appear to be just another officially sanctioned operation. The first batch of former Green Berets, four of them, toting war bags, were met by Wilson in Switzerland in Zurich Airport's international zone. He took them to a coffee shop. They would later recall how impressed they were by him. He was their kind of guy, tough, down to earth, authoritative. He told them they were going into Libya. I want you to ingratiate yourselves with those people, get in tight with them, whatever it requires. One of the Green Berets have participated in many CIA missions in Southeast Asia that included the assassination of suspected Vietcong sympathizers and secret search and destroy attacks in Cambodia. In other words, they're talking about the Phoenix program, which was, in part which was the brainchild of William Colby, the director of the CIA. But they were also working very closely with CIA spooks like Lucien Connier, and then also later U.S. Special Forces CIA founder John K. Singlaub, who was also later incriminated in the Iran-Contra scandal, as well as the Nugan Hand Bank scandal of Australia, and as well as Operation Cyclone of Charlie Wilson's War, in which the United States secretly funded the Mujahideen between the Carter and Reagan administrations to fight the Soviets. And John K. Singlaub goes back even further, in which not only did he serve in places like Korea, he also was a quote unquote military observer to the Chinese Civil War, in which he monitored the Maoist, communist, and the nationalist Chinese under Chiang Kai shek. And it's very important to know that even back then, China was a producer of opium, and some of the tribes in the southwestern part, kind of as you're going towards Southeast Asia, some of those groups, who I want to say were the descendants of the Hmong people of Laos, because I think the Hmong people are actually a Chinese people who actually migrated into the Southeast Asia. This is where you start seeing a lot of the tribes who grow heroin. And this is why heroin sales and everything went insane in the Vietnam War, but then also later in our current day in the Afghanistan War. Um, so John K. Singlaub is kind of like, the general spook who connects a lot of the dots in what I call the Blancos network. So that's very interesting. So in this article, they're admitting that some of the Green Berets were actually probably veterans of the Phoenix program assassination campaigns. So he remembers thinking that this sounded like an infiltration mission. There would be no signed contracts, Wilson said. If I Welsh, you'll come looking to kill me. If you Welsh, I'll be coming after you. That's our contract. So that's how serious it is. Basically, if you screw up, I'm gonna come kill you, and if I screw you over, I already know you're gonna come kill me. So there's no need for us to have a contract because this is the high stakes world we exist in, right? So so who are we working for? Me, said Wilson, and they appreciated how professionally cryptic his response was. Nothing was more than necessary. Nothing more than necessary. No elaborate explanations, no pep talks. And the truth was that this was no weirder than dozens of agency ventures they had known about in the past. So before Wilson was through, he would bring in more than 100 ex-berets, Marine black belt karate masters, and pilot instructors for Libya's American-made Chinook cargo and troop-carrying helicopters. And I probably need to do another video on this in and of itself, but this relates to my earlier videos in which my quote unquote series, The Many Crimes of Donald Trump. So when you this is basically alluding to or foreshadowing Eric Prince, right? So this is Eric Prince in Project Opus, in which Eric Prince, underneath Trump, was trying to basically like fund General Haftar, one of the many warlords in Libya. Um, so it's all kind of the same thing. Like when people say that Donald Trump is going to drain the swamp, he's effectively just a continuation of everything I'm reading to you right now, just in a new generation. Um, it's just we're basically just living in Iran Contra 2.0, and Reagan is now replaced by Trump. But all of his followers believe that he's some sort of different person who's going to like drain the swamp. When really, I think we're going to see a lot more clandestine operations in the Trump deep state with people like Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard. They're probably going to let General Michael Flynn back into the mix. Joe Hagan, um, Woolsey, former CIA director. A lot of more deep state stuff is going to be happening, but a lot of his followers just can't accept that because they see him as some sort of messianic figure. So this is very interesting. So he then contracted out to outfit one of Gaddafi's pet projects, a 3,500 man mobile strike force. From combat boots to heavy machine guns, the weaponry alone added up to 23 million. Bringing in a Pentagon intelligence analyst, Wilson was able to supply Hijazi with a variety of top secret documents, including contingency plans for the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division in case of trouble in the Middle East, which is just basic treason, right? You're giving the contingency plans for U.S. Army Airborne to a terrorist nation. So back to the article. And when Hajaji asked for a few American guns to be delivered to American embassies here and there, Wilson threw them in at no extra charge. So this seems to be the Terpil stuff, right? So during 1979 and 1980, 11 anti-Qaddafi Libyans were murdered in Europe. One of them, newly married with an infant daughter and living in West Germany, was shot in the back while exiting from an underpass at the Bonn railroad station. The weapon, a 357 Magnum, was recovered and traced back to Fayetteville, North Carolina, where it had been purchased by a former Green Beret working for Wilson. So that's what I'm saying. So these assassination campaigns of anti-Qaddafi Libyan dissidents, some of them seem that they were done by ex-Green Berets, some even possibly by active duty Green Berets, but then also some by just Gaddafi's forces abroad, a part of his like revolutionary kind of junta or whatever, going around killing his opposition. So pretty wild stuff. So with that being said, I think So I kind of so okay. So I think that's really kind of about it for this video. Like I said, a lot of this information is in my other videos. But also, just to lastly clear this up. So as a summary, right? Let's summarize it because it gets kind of kablooey, right? So let me go here, here. Let me go to where is it at? Right here. Okay, so it's a lot to summarize. So let me just blow this up for us real quick. So this is to the Blonde Ghost Network that I was talking about, right? So in this article, or sorry, in this video, we are talking about how what's his name? Joseph McElroy of Pennsylvania helped Frank Terpil get about 50 guns into London, right? And then separately in another article, Edwin Wilson working with Hijazi, who was the intelligence official under Gaddafi, also wanted guns at embassies. Edwin Wilson said he could do that no problem. So this seems to be where Turple and Wilson were working together to smuggle guns into embassies for Libya, right? So McElroy, Wilson, guns at into Libyan embassies across the globe. And some of those guns were unfortunately used to kill anti-Qaddafi Libyan dissidents, mainly in places like West Germany, but also in London. But then also police officer Yvonne Fletcher in 1984 was unfortunately killed at a protest at one of the embassies. So yeah, it just all just kind of connects really from there. And then also, not only is there the gun running stuff and the blowback because of the guns, because of Edwin and Turples, and also Patry Loomis, the guy who actually recruits the Green Berets for Wilson to go to Geneva, who then go down into or Zurich, Switzerland, who therefore get flown into Libya. This Patry Loomis character who was CIA working with Edwin Wilson. Some of those Green Berets, it seems, he recruits about 10 Green Berets, if not more. It seems like even more, but overall, there's almost like 100 U.S. military type recruits or something crazy. Um, Patry Loomis is also involved in this, and I talked about him in another video. So it's all kind of interconnected. So I'm just going to end this video right here. So this one was about James McElroy, and he's kind of a smaller character, but I want to kind of get him out the way. So, all right, thank you. All right, bye.